They erased 5 plants from your future, not from history, not from science, from your backyard, from your seed catalog, from the conversation your grandfather should have had with you when you were 12 years old and the world still made sense. 5 plants that replace meat completely, nutritionally, permanently. Plants that need no fertilizer, no irrigation system, no coddling. Plants that have fed entire civilizations through famines, colonial sieges, brutal winters, and supply chain collapses that make today's grocery crisis look like a mild inconvenience. You were never supposed to know about them. Think about what has happened in 4 years. Beef prices up nearly 50%. Eggs crossed $5 a dozen in outbreak years and never fully returned. Canned protein disappeared from shelves during the first supply disruption in under 72 hours. One avian flu outbreak in Iowa removes 40 million birds from the national supply chain. One. And the price of protein spikes across every state within a week. One processing plant fire, one port disruption, one railroad strike, and the entire American food system shudders like a wounded animal. This is not fragility by accident. Consolidation requires fragility. When 4 corporations control 85% of the American beef supply, a single point of failure becomes everyone's crisis simultaneously. The architecture was built this way. You are not a customer in this system. You are a dependency. And dependencies do not get warned when the system is about to fail them. Real self-reliance does not mean growing lettuce in a raised bed. Lettuce is water with a crunch. It is not protein. It is not survival. Real self-reliance means growing the caloric and nutritional foundation that your body actually requires to function through a winter, a job loss, a collapse, or something the news has not named yet. That foundation is protein, and the grocery store is the most fragile, most expensive, most controlled delivery mechanism for protein that has ever existed in human history. There is a different way. There always was. And the first plant I am going to show you is a tree. It grows in Siberia. It survives in temperatures that kill every other food crop on the continent, and it produces seed pods containing up to 36% protein by dry weight, more than chicken, more than most commercial legumes. Once you plant it, it feeds you for 50 years without a single bag of fertilizer, a single irrigation line, or a single return trip to a garden center. This is the plant they called the meat tree, and it is only the beginning. Stay with me, because the second plant on this list was not just forgotten, it was burned, deliberately, by an empire. Because they understood that a people who can grow their own complete protein cannot be starved into submission. They were not wrong, and someone decided you should not know that.
Before I give you the name, understand what this plant survived. It grows in hardiness zone 2. Zone 2 is northern Canada. It is interior Alaska. It is the Siberian steppe. It is the kind of cold that kills fruit trees, destroys root vegetable stores, and turns winter wheat into frozen rot if the snow cover fails for even 2 weeks. This plant does not merely survive that environment, it evolved for it. The cold is not a threat to it. The cold is home. When the Russian state began its eastward colonial expansion across the Ural Mountains in the 1700s, settlers were pushed into landscapes that had no agricultural infrastructure, no established food networks, and winters that lasted 6 to 7 months. Starvation was not a theoretical risk, it was a seasonal expectation. The indigenous peoples of Central Asia and the Siberian corridor had already solved this problem. They had been solving it for centuries. They ate the pods of a thorny, fast-growing shrub that lined riverbanks and grew in sandy, nearly soil-free terrain where nothing else would establish. The pods were boiled, they were ground into flour, they were eaten raw when nothing else was available. They kept people alive when nothing else did. That knowledge was not preserved by botanical institutions. It was not cataloged by the agricultural extension systems of Europe or North America. It was carried in the bodies and the habits of people who had no choice but to remember it. And when those people were displaced, assimilated, or simply ignored by the expanding colonial agricultural model, the knowledge of this plant was quietly buried. Here is what makes this plant extraordinary. The seeds inside those pods contain up to 36% crude protein by dry weight. 36%. Ground beef is approximately 26% protein. Chicken breast is around 31%. This shrub, growing in gravel and sand with no inputs, produces seed protein that outperforms the meat aisle at your supermarket, and it does it every single year for 50 years from a single planting. Look at how it grows. The shrub reaches 6 to 15 feet tall, depending on variety and conditions. The leaves are small and compound, feathery in appearance, bright green in spring. In late spring, it flowers yellow, small yellow pea flowers in clusters up the branches. By midsummer, those flowers become pods, thin pods, green turning tan. Each pod holds between 3 and 6 seeds. The seeds are round, olive green, and dense. They look like small green peas. They taste like mild lentils. Look for the pods hanging in clusters. When they begin to brown and dry on the branch, that is your harvest window. This plant is a nitrogen fixer. That fact is more important than most people understand. It does not require fertilizer because it manufactures its own. The roots form a partnership with soil bacteria called rhizobium. That bacteria converts atmospheric nitrogen directly into a form the plant can use. And when the plant drops its leaves in autumn, those nitrogen-rich leaves decompose into the soil around it, fertilizing not only itself, but every other plant growing nearby. You are not just planting a protein source, you are building a protein-producing system that will outlive you if you manage it correctly. The settlers who understood this in Siberia understood something about time that modern grocery store logic has completely erased from how we think about food. And that is only plant 1, because the empire that burned the second plant understood something even more specific. They did not burn the fields to destroy a food. They burned the fields to destroy a civilization's ability to perform its most sacred rituals, and in doing so, they accidentally created the most politically charged vegetable in the Western Hemisphere.
In 1519, Hernán Cortés arrived in the Valley of Mexico and encountered an empire that fed 25 million people without a single acre of European grain. The Aztec agricultural system was, by any objective measure, more sophisticated than anything Spain had produced at the time. The Aztecs understood companion planting, water management, and soil ecology in ways that European agriculture would not rediscover for 3 centuries. They fed their empire on corn, beans, squash, and one other crop that the Spanish looked at and immediately identified as a threat. Not a military threat, something more dangerous, a nutritional and spiritual threat. This grain was not merely food, it was woven into every sacred ceremony the Aztec people performed. It was ground into flour, mixed with honey and human blood in ritual preparation, and formed into figures of their gods. The figures were eaten communally. The Spanish Catholic missionaries recognized the ritual immediately. They called it a mockery of the Eucharist. They called it diabolical. And they responded with a policy that is almost impossible to fully absorb when you read it in the historical record. In 1521, following the fall of Tenochtitlan,
The Spanish crown issued an edict banning the cultivation of this plant entirely across the conquered territories of New Spain. Possession of the seeds was punishable by death. They sent soldiers into the agricultural fields and burned the crops. They burned them systematically, not as collateral damage, as strategy, because they understood, in a way that most modern food policy analysts have forgotten, that a people's protein supply is a people's power. Destroy the protein, you destroy the resistance. You destroy the capacity to sustain a fight. You destroy the caloric foundation of an entire civilization's identity. And it almost worked. The plant survived because indigenous communities hid the seeds. They smuggled them into remote highland regions that Spanish soldiers could not easily reach or patrol. They maintained seed lines in secret for generations. The knowledge of how to grow it, how to process it, and what it was capable of nutritionally was passed through oral tradition in communities that kept no written records that the Spanish could seize and burn. This plant is Amaranth, and what the Spanish were so desperate to eradicate is a complete protein. That means it contains all 9 essential amino acids. Essential means your body cannot manufacture them, you must consume them. Most plant proteins are incomplete. They are missing one or more of the essential amino acids, which is why nutritionists historically told people that plant-based diets required careful combination of multiple sources to achieve complete nutrition. Amaranth breaks that rule entirely. It sits alongside quinoa, soy, and hemp as one of the only plant foods that delivers a full amino acid profile in a single source. 100 grams of cooked amaranth grain provides approximately 9 grams of complete protein. That is comparable to 1.5 eggs, from a plant that grows in zones 4 through 10, that thrives in drought, that actually produces more seed in extreme heat than in moderate conditions.
Look at the plant itself. Amaranth grows tall, depending on variety, between 3 and 8 feet. The stalk is thick and slightly reddish in some varieties. The leaves are broad and oval-shaped, green to deep burgundy depending on cultivar. The seed head is the identifying feature. It emerges from the top of the plant as a dense, plume-like structure, red, gold, or green, heavy with tiny seeds packed so densely you will stop and look twice the first time you see a mature one. Look at that plume closely. Each tiny sphere you see is a seed. A single plant produces up to 50,000 seeds. 50,000 seeds from one plant in one season. Here is how you grow it in the conditions where it thrives most aggressively. Direct sow the seeds after your last frost date, when soil temperature is at least 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Press them barely into the soil surface. They need light to germinate. Do not bury them. 1/8 of an inch maximum. In full sun, amaranth in partial shade produces weak stems and reduced seed yield. Space plants 18 inches apart. Thin ruthlessly. Overcrowding is the primary cause of poor yields with this plant. Do not water it much. This is not intuitive, but it is critical. Amaranth evolved in high-altitude tropical environments where rainfall was seasonal and intense, followed by long, dry periods. Consistent light watering produces lush leaves and weak seed production. Let the soil dry out between waterings. Heat does not stress this plant. Drought does not stress this plant. What stresses it is being treated like a European vegetable that needs constant moisture management. The leaves are edible throughout the growing season. Pick them young when they are between 4 and 6 inches long. They taste similar to spinach, mild and slightly earthy. They are rich in calcium, iron, and protein. As the plant matures and the seed head forms, the leaves become tougher and slightly more bitter. Still edible, still nutritious, but most homesteaders prefer the young leaves. The seeds are your protein payload. Harvest the seed heads when the plume begins to dry and the seeds release easily when you run your fingers through them. Cut the entire seed head, place it inside a paper bag, Hang the bag in a dry location for 2 weeks. The seeds will continue to dry and fall from the plume into the bag. Then thresh by rubbing the plume between your hands over a bucket. Winnow in front of a fan to separate the chaff. The clean seeds store for 3 to 5 years in a cool, dry container. Grind them into flour. Pop them like popcorn in a dry pan over high heat. They pop into tiny white spheres. Cook them as porridge. Add them to soups as a protein thickener. The flavor is mild, slightly nutty, extremely versatile. If you have made it this far into this video, you are already holding more suppressed agricultural knowledge than most people with advanced degrees in nutrition. But what I have not told you yet is this. The third plant on this list was not burned by conquistadors. It was ignored by a different kind of power, a quieter kind. And it grows so fast that in some climates it becomes difficult to contain. 15 feet in a single growing season. And its protein content does something that neither of the first 2 plants can do on their own.
There is a tree that has been called the miracle tree in 12 different languages across 4 continents. The indigenous communities of northern India, sub-Saharan Africa, the Philippines, and Central America all arrived independently at the same conclusion about this plant. Not similar conclusions, the same conclusion, that it was the most complete food available from a single source in their environment, that it could sustain human life in conditions where nothing else could, that it grew faster than any other food tree they had encountered, and that modern agricultural systems, seed companies, and food industry infrastructure had no interest in promoting it because it could not be patented, could not be processed into a shelf product at meaningful margins, and could not be made into a recurring purchase the way a grain crop or livestock operation could. You cannot monetize something that grows 15 feet in 1 year and drops protein from every branch. Let me give you the numbers because they are almost insulting in their clarity. The dried leaves of this tree contain approximately 27% protein by dry weight. Compare that to whole milk yogurt at roughly 3.5% protein. Compare it to beef at 26%. The leaves of this tree match beef for protein density, gram for gram. And unlike beef, the protein in these leaves comes packaged alongside calcium content that exceeds milk by a factor of 4, iron content that exceeds spinach by a factor of 3, and vitamin C content that exceeds oranges by a factor of 7. These comparisons come from nutritional analyses conducted by the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health and published in studies from the early 2000s. The researchers were not trying to make an argument for home growing. They were trying to address malnutrition in developing nations. The results were so consistent that several African nations began integrating this tree into national nutrition programs. The tree was being distributed in West Africa by NGOs throughout the 1990s precisely because nothing else they had available produced complete nutrition at this density with this ease of growth. And American seed catalogs largely ignored it. Here is why. Growing it in American climates requires understanding its temperature limits. It is tropical. It does not tolerate frost. In zones 9 through 12, it grows as a true perennial tree, reaching 15 to 30 feet at maturity. In zones 7 and 8, it can survive mild winters if heavily mulched at the root zone and cut back hard in spring. In zones 6 and below, most growers treat it as an annual or container plant, starting from seed indoors in March, transplanting after frost, and harvesting aggressively through summer and fall before first freeze. The growth rate is real. It is not horticultural marketing. Plant a seed in May in full sun with well-drained soil. Water it through establishment. By September, you will have a 6 to 8 foot tree producing harvestable leaves. In true tropical conditions, 15-foot first-year growth is documented. In warm American climates, 8 to 12 feet is realistic.
It thrives in drought. This is critical, and it is counterintuitive. Moringa developed in the foothills of the Himalayas and spread across the Indian subcontinent in conditions of seasonal drought followed by monsoon rainfall. Its root system is designed to store water and nutrients during dry periods. Overwatering in poorly drained soil is the primary cause of failure with this plant in American gardens. Plant it in sandy or loamy soil. If your soil holds water for more than 24 hours after a heavy rain, amend it aggressively with sand and organic matter before planting. Moringa in waterlogged soil will yellow within 2 weeks and collapse within a month. I want to be direct about something I got wrong for an embarrassingly long time. My first 2 attempts at growing this tree produced spindly plants that barely reached 3 feet before stalling. I was treating them like vegetable plants. Consistent watering, rich amended bed soil, the same approach I used for tomatoes. The plants were drowning. The third attempt, I planted them in the sandy, gravelly edge of my property where I thought nothing would grow. They exploded. That was the year I started understanding that the plants that have been erased from mainstream cultivation were often erased precisely because they do not need what the agricultural industry sells you. Harvest the leaves when branch sections reach 8 to 12 inches in length. Look at the leaf structure. Each leaf is compound, meaning a single leaf stalk holds dozens of small oval leaflets. Those leaflets are what you are harvesting. Strip them from the stalk. Fresh leaves can be eaten raw in salads, added to smoothies, or cooked into soups and stews. The flavor is mild, slightly grassy, similar to watercress. Drying concentrates the protein and extends storage dramatically. Spread the leaves in a single layer in a warm, shaded location with good air circulation. They dry in 2 to 3 days. Dried and ground into powder, they store for 1 year in an airtight container and can be added to any dish as a nutrient and protein booster without significantly altering flavor. In zones where it behaves as a perennial, cut it back hard to 2 feet above the ground every spring. This forces dense new growth that is easier to harvest than tall, mature branches. The plant responds to this pruning by producing more harvestable growth than an unpruned tree of the same age. But here is the thing about Moringa that most survival gardeners miss entirely. It solves the protein problem above ground. The fourth plant solves it underground, and the underground solution is the one that kept settlers alive through American winters that Moringa could never survive.
The winter of 1621 nearly ended the Plymouth colony entirely. 45 of the 102 Mayflower passengers had already died in the first winter before the harvest that history would later mythologize as the first Thanksgiving. The colonists arrived without an understanding of the soil, the climate, or the native food systems that had supported human populations in that region for thousands of years. What they had was the generosity of the Wampanoag people, who taught them which plants the land already offered. And among the most important of those plants was a vine, a twisting, aggressive, spreading vine with purple flowers that grew along riverbanks and forest edges and produced clusters of tubers underground that the Wampanoag called hopness. The Wampanoag had been eating hopness for generations. They boiled the tubers, they dried them and ground them into flour. They ate the seeds, which developed in pods along the vine in late summer. The plant was not cultivated in the European sense. It was tended. It was understood. It was integrated into the food landscape as a perennial, self-propagating protein source that required no plowing, no annual replanting, and no fertilization. The colonists ate it and survived. And then, over the following 2 centuries, as European agricultural models took over the landscape and the knowledge systems of indigenous people were deliberately dismantled and suppressed, hopness disappeared from the cultural memory of the communities it had saved. It was not banned. It did not need to be banned. It was simply replaced. The common potato, imported from South America by way of Europe, arrived on American shores as a standardized, patentable, monetizable crop that fit neatly into the European agricultural infrastructure. Hopness, which requires no annual replanting and cannot be easily controlled or commodified, was left to grow wild along the roadsides where most people today walk right past it without recognition. This plant is Apios americana, the ground nut, and it contains 3 times the protein of a standard potato. Think about that number. The potato is considered a survival food, a reliable caloric staple. Entire populations have organized their food security around it, and this plant, growing as a perennial weed along the edges of North American waterways, produces tubers with 3 times the protein content of the crop that defined food security for 18th and 19th century Europe. The protein in these tubers is approximately 18% by dry weight. The common potato averages around 6%. Look at the vine in summer. It climbs aggressively. Left to itself, it will reach 12 to 15 feet, twining around anything vertical. The leaves are compound, composed of 5 to 7 small pointed leaflets arranged along a central stalk. In midsummer, it flowers. The flowers are small, fragrant, and packed into dense clusters along the vine. Look at the color, a deep reddish purple to pale lavender, depending on the individual plant. The flower looks almost like a small sweet pea blossom with a slight twist to the petals. That flower is your identification marker. Nothing that looks similar to Apios americana flowers with that specific reddish-purple compound cluster in a wetland or forest edge environment. The tubers form in chains underground, connected by thin stolons like a string of small potatoes. Sizes range from marble-sized in young plants to golf ball-sized in plants that have been established for 3 to 5 years. Dig carefully with a garden fork. The chain structure means aggressive digging will sever the connections and scatter smaller tubers that can reestablish and spread further. If you are harvesting from a managed planting, leave the smallest tubers in the ground. They will overwinter and produce a larger harvest the following year. Grow it in any moist soil. It prefers partial shade, but tolerates full sun with adequate moisture. It does not tolerate drought as aggressively as Moringa or the Siberian pea shrub, but it tolerates waterlogged, low-quality, compacted soil that would kill almost any other protein crop. Plant the tubers 2 to 3 inches deep in early spring. They establish slowly in year 1. Do not judge the planting by first-year yield. By year 2, the vine is vigorous. By year 3, the tuber chains are dense and the harvest becomes significant. The tubers must be cooked before eating. Raw Apios tubers contain compounds that cause digestive distress in most people. Boiling or roasting eliminates this entirely. Boiled, they taste similar to a turnip crossed with a potato, slightly sweet, dense, and starchy. Roasted in the skin, they caramelize and become almost nutty. The seeds, harvested from the pods in late summer when the pods turn brown and dry, can be cooked like any other legume. They are small and round and produce a flavor that is mild and slightly bean-like. The Wampanoag people understood something that the European settlers briefly grasped in their desperation and then forgot the moment they had enough power and resources to replace it with something more familiar. The best survival food is the one the land already produces, perennially, without your intervention. And the 5th plant on this list takes that principle to its absolute extreme, because it does not just survive without intervention, it does better without it, and anyone who tries to help it too much will destroy it entirely.
There is a crop that has been growing in the Sonoran Desert for over 5,000 years.
The Tohono O'odham people of southern Arizona and northern Mexico developed and maintained seed lines for this bean across 5 millennia of desert agriculture in one of the most hostile growing environments on the North American continent. Summer temperatures reaching 115 degrees Fahrenheit, annual rainfall averaging less than 12 inches, alkaline, rocky, mineral-depleted soil. Conditions under which conventional crops do not merely underperform, they die within days of transplanting. This bean thrives in those conditions, not tolerates, thrives. The yield actually increases as the temperature increases, up to the threshold of about 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Above that threshold, conventional beans experience catastrophic flower drop, meaning the heat causes them to abort their reproductive development before beans form. The Tepary bean continues flowering and setting pods in temperatures that have already destroyed an entire planting of conventional varieties. Researchers at the University of Arizona who studied its heat tolerance in the 1980s described its mechanism for surviving extreme heat as an adaptation so specialized that it had no parallel in any other cultivated bean species they had examined. But the detail that most homesteaders get completely backwards is the water. Do not water this plant the way you water other beans. Overwatering Tepary beans does not just reduce yield, it triggers lush vegetative growth at the expense of seed production. The plant puts its energy into producing biomass when water is abundant, and it puts its energy into producing seeds when water is scarce. The Tohono O'odham planted Tepary beans specifically in the path of seasonal flood wash, relying on a single heavy application of water from monsoon runoff to germinate the seeds and establish the plants. After that, they did not irrigate. They let the desert heat and the dry air force the plants into reproductive mode. In a home garden, replicate this. Water heavily once at planting to establish germination, then back off dramatically. Water only when the leaves show the beginning stages of wilt, approximately once every 10 to 14 days in average summer heat. In extreme drought conditions, 1 deep watering per week is sufficient. The beans will look stressed. They are supposed to look stressed. A stressed Tepary bean plant is a productive Tepary bean plant. The protein density of dried Tepary beans is approximately 23 to 25% by dry weight. That is among the highest protein concentrations of any commonly cultivated bean, higher than black beans, higher than pinto beans, higher than kidney beans. The fiber content is also exceptional, which matters for long-term storage caloric efficiency. Dried Tepary beans store for multiple years in sealed containers without significant nutritional degradation. They are a long-term food security asset in a way that fresh protein sources can never be. Plant in full sun after all frost danger has passed and soil temperature has reached at least 65 degrees Fahrenheit. Direct sow 2 inches deep. Do not start indoors. Tepary beans resent transplanting, and the root disruption of indoor starting reduces yield significantly. Space plants 6 inches apart in rows 18 inches apart. Mulch lightly to retain some soil moisture during the establishment phase, then pull the mulch back once the plants are 12 inches tall to allow the soil surface to dry rapidly after any rainfall. Harvest when the pods have dried completely on the vine and the beans inside rattle when you shake the pod. Pull the entire plant if the majority of pods are dry. Thresh by placing the plants inside a large bag and beating the bag against a hard surface. The dried pods shatter and release the beans. Winnow to remove chaff. Store the cleaned beans in sealed jars in a cool, dark location. The insider community moment is this. If you have watched this entire video, you now hold a complete protein production system that functions across every climate zone in North America. A protein system that requires no annual seed purchases from a corporation, no fertilizer inputs, no irrigation infrastructure beyond what nature already provides. A system that colonial powers burned, banned, ignored, and buried, not because it did not work, but because it worked too well to allow ordinary people to remain independent. The grocery store needs you to believe that protein is complicated, that it requires refrigeration, processing facilities, and a supply chain that spans 3 continents, that growing your own meat equivalent is a hobby for people with too much time and too little sense. Every plant in this video proves that belief false. The question is not whether you can grow your own protein. The question is which of these 5 plants you are putting in the ground first. Tell me in the comments. Because here is what I know. Every person who watches this video and does nothing is making a choice. And every person who takes 1 seed packet of Amaranth, or sources 1 Siberian pea shrub from a specialty nursery, or orders 1 pound of Tepary beans for planting, is making a different choice. A choice that the entire architecture of the modern food system was designed to prevent you from making. Plant the first one. The rest will follow. And one more thing. There are 2 plants that did not make this list. Plants that were not just suppressed or ignored, plants that were actively reclassified by the USDA, specifically because their proliferation threatened the weed control chemical market. Both of them produce more protein per square foot than anything I showed you today. That video is coming.